Hey, welcome to the channel. Let's explore what the book has to offer. Oh, and keep an eye out for small notes that will pop up on your screen at regular intervals, perfect for quick takeaways and jotting down some life-changing insights. So, let's jump right in and see what this book can teach us.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something I think we all deal with, emotions.
Yeah.
You sent over a ton of notes and excerpts, mostly from the book Master Your Emotions,
Right.
plus some other research and quotes, and we're here to kind of distill it all down to the most useful stuff for you.
Absolutely.
Ready to unlock the secrets of emotional mastery.
Let's do it. We'll go beyond just theory and give you some practical takeaways to apply in your life.
Perfect. Now, the book hammers this point home. You are not your emotions. They're more like passing weather systems, not the whole landscape of who you are. Why is that so crucial to understand?
Well, I think because when you identify with your emotions, you give them control over you.
Okay.
When you see them as temporary, then you can have a sense of power over them.
Yeah.
It's like the author's own experience writing the book. They shared how they almost quit, feeling totally inadequate. But instead of giving into that feeling, they used that struggle as a learning experience, which ended up enriching the book itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's easy to get caught up in the feeling. But recognizing it's temporary, I think, can be a game changer. The book also points out how we often misuse the word feel to avoid talking about real emotions. Like instead of saying, I feel frustrated, we say, I feel like this project is pointless. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Absolutely. It's a way of masking our true emotional state with the judgment or thought. And this is where the book dives into the concept of the ego.
The ego, yes, this is huge. It uses the terms ego, story, and identity almost interchangeably, which I have to admit was a little confusing for me at first.
Yeah, it can be. A simpler way to understand it is this. The ego is that part of us that's hardwired for survival.
Okay.
It wants to feel important and in control. The story is the narrative we create about ourselves based on our experiences and beliefs. And the identity is how we view ourselves based on that story.
Okay. That clarifies things a little bit. So how does this ego tie into our emotions?
Well, the ego is constantly seeking validation and security. It clings to things, possessions, appearances, even our problems,
Wow.
to create a sense of self.
That's fascinating. It makes me think about consumerism. Are we all just buying stuff to feed our egos?
The book actually makes that argument, suggesting that capitalism thrives on our ego's need for external validation.
Right.
But it goes even deeper. The ego also craves a sense of superiority. That's where you see things like name-dropping, gossip, even complaining about a broken coffee machine. It's all about boosting the ego's sense of importance, even in subtle ways.
Wow. I never thought of it like that. So how do these emotions fueled by the ego actually take hold of us?
The book lays out a simple but powerful formula. Interpretation plus identification plus repetition equals strong emotion.
Can you break that down?
Of course. Let's say you have a disagreement with a colleague.
Okay.
You interpret the situation based on your existing beliefs and experiences. Maybe you think, they don't respect me. You then identify with that thought, making it part of your story. I'm always being overlooked. And then what do most of us do? We replay the scenario in our minds over and over again.
Yeah.
That repetition strengthens the emotional connection, making the feeling more intense and lasting.
Ah, the dreaded mental replay. I'm definitely guilty of that. So to gain control, we need to break that cycle.
Exactly. And the book provides tons of practical tools for doing just that. But what's important to remember is that interrupting any part of the cycle weakens the emotion's grip.
I love that. Okay, so let's dive into some of those practical tools. The book starts with something I think we all know is important, but we probably don't prioritize enough: sleep.
Right. It's amazing how much research backs this up. Good sleep is not just about feeling rested. It's directly linked to lower risks of depression and anxiety, and even has an impact on lifespan.
Wow. I knew sleep was important, but that's a whole other level. Does the book offer specific tips for better sleep?
Definitely. They emphasize having a consistent bedtime routine, making sure your bedroom is dark and cool, and avoiding screen time before bed.
Yeah.
All things we've heard before, but sometimes we need that reminder, right?
For sure. What's next on the list of emotional mastery tools?
Something that might surprise you. Your body. The book argues that posture and movement have a direct impact on our emotions, not just through fitness, but on a deeper neurological level. They share this fascinating story about David Kent.
David Kent, who's that?
He was the author's alter ego. They actually induced a state of depression in themselves just by adopting a slumped posture and dwelling on negative thoughts.
Wow.
Then, by changing their posture and thoughts, they reversed it. It's a powerful example of how our physical state sends signals to our brain, influencing our mood. So that old saying, stand up straight, might have more to it than we realize.
That's mind-blowing. It makes me want to sit up straighter right now. What other fascinating body-mind connections does the book explore?
They touch on the power of visualization.
Oh.
Picturing positive experiences can actually evoke positive emotions, like a mental rehearsal for happiness.
I love that. Okay, next up, breathing and music. I'm curious, how do those fit into the emotional puzzle?
Well, you might be surprised by how much power we have in our breath. The book explains that different breathing paces actually correlate to different emotional states. It's almost like shifting gears in a car. You can actually change your emotional state just by changing how you breathe.
Hold on. So just by changing how I breathe, I can shift from, say, anxious to calm.
Exactly. And they drop this intriguing fact. Slowing your breath down to just 4 cycles per minute can increase visual clarity and bodily sensitivity. They don't explain why. Just enough to make you curious.
Very clever. Now, music seems like a more obvious mood booster. We all have our, our favorite playlists for certain moods.
Of course. But the book goes beyond just anecdotal evidence. They cite studies on how music can be used therapeutically to treat depression and boost self-esteem. There's even an anecdote about an athlete who uses specific music to get into an invincible mindset, even during grueling races.
That's so cool. It makes you realize how much untapped potential we have to influence our emotions through simple things like music and breathing. But what about when those really heavy negative emotions hit? The kind that feel impossible to shake?
Yeah, that's where the book shifts gears a bit. It acknowledges that positive thinking is great, but sometimes we need more powerful tools.
So what do we do when those deep-seated negative emotions surface? It feels like they become part of who we are.
Yeah, and the book addresses that directly, saying that repressed emotions can actually become ingrained in our identity if we don't deal with them effectively.
That resonates with me. What's the solution?
They offer a 3-step process. First, observe the emotion with detachment, almost as if you're watching it from outside yourself.
Oh, okay.
Second, label it accurately. Instead of I am angry, say I am experiencing anger. This creates a little space between you and the emotion.
Right.
And third, ask yourself the crucial question. Could I let this feeling go?
That's surprisingly simple, but it makes sense. By acknowledging the emotion without identifying with it, we create the possibility of releasing it.
Exactly. And they mention a technique called the Sedona method, but they don't go into detail. It's more like a breadcrumb for those who want to explore further.
Very smart. So we've tackled letting go of negativity, but how do we cultivate more positive emotions? The book quotes a bunch of wise folks, Buddha, Emerson, all agreeing that we become what we think about.
Right. And this gets into the concept of thought-emotion loops. Negative thoughts create negative emotions, which fuel more negative thoughts. It's a vicious cycle. But the same applies to positive emotions. The book suggests a simple tool for shifting this cycle.
Okay.
Create a win log.
A win log, what's that?
It's literally just writing down your wins each day, even the small ones. It could be finishing a project, having a good conversation, or simply making a healthy choice. It helps to counter that negativity bias our brains tend to have.
I love that. It's a way of actively training your brain to focus on the positive.
Exactly. But sometimes we need to take action before we can feel differently. The book calls it acting your way into a new feeling.
Give me an example of that.
Like imagine you're terrified of public speaking. Instead of letting the fear paralyze you, you rehearse your presentation over and over.
Okay.
The action of practicing helps to dissolve the anxiety. Or if there's tension with a friend, you choose to have that difficult conversation.
Right.
The act of communicating can lead to emotional relief and a stronger relationship.
So it's not always about waiting for the right feeling, but taking action to create a different reality.
Exactly. It's about using your behavior to shift your emotional state. And the book takes this a step further, challenging us to see even negative emotions as opportunities for growth.
Okay. Now that's deep. How can something like fear or anger be a good thing?
Well, they give some incredibly inspiring examples, like Alice Summer, who found joy even in a concentration camp, or Nick Vujicic, who was born without limbs but lives a life full of happiness and purpose. It's about recognizing that challenging emotions are often signals that something needs to change.
Yeah.
Messages that can guide us towards a more fulfilling life.
Wow. That's powerful. So it's not about eliminating difficult emotions, but understanding them and even using them to fuel our growth.
Exactly. Now, the book goes into detail about specific emotions and how to work with them constructively.
Perfect.
Right.
That's exactly where I wanted to go next. We just scratched the surface of some powerful tools for understanding and shifting our emotions. Now, let's dive into how to actually work with specific emotions,
Right.
starting with one that I think often gets a bad rap, anger.
Yeah. The source material frames anger in a really interesting way. It argues that anger, like all emotions, is simply energy. It's neither inherently good nor bad, but how we channel that energy is what matters.
Okay, so instead of trying to suppress anger, we should find a healthy way to express it. I've heard people say that anger is always a sign that something needs to change.
That's a great point, and the
Hmm,
book echoes that sentiment. Suppressing anger can actually be more harmful because it can fester and lead to unhealthy outbursts later on.
right.
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Hmm.
Eventually, it's going to pop back up with even more force.
Okay. So what's a healthy way to deal with anger? Do we just let it all out, yell and scream?
Not quite.
Yeah.
The key is finding a constructive outlet for that energy.
Okay.
The book suggests things like exercise, creative expression, or even having a calm but assertive conversation with the person who triggered the anger. It's about channeling that energy in a way that doesn't harm yourself or others.
Right. That makes sense. I've definitely noticed how exercise can help me process anger and frustration. Does the book make any distinction between anger and other negative emotions?
Yes. They specifically differentiate anger from hatred, which I thought was really insightful. Anger is often a fleeting emotion, a response to a specific situation, whereas hatred is more like a chronic condition,
Okay.
a deep-seated resentment that can be incredibly toxic.
That's a powerful distinction. It makes me think of the saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
The book actually quotes Nelson Mandela, who said something very similar. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. So how do we avoid falling into that trap of resentment? The key is forgiveness.
Forgiveness, that can be so hard, especially when someone has really hurt us. Does the book talk about how to actually forgive someone?
It does, and they emphasize that forgiveness isn't about condoning the other person's actions,
Right.
but about releasing the grip that the anger and resentment have on us. It's an act of self-compassion,
Yeah.
freeing ourselves from that emotional burden.
Yeah, that's a helpful perspective. Okay, let's move on to another emotion that I think a lot of people struggle with, sadness. It seems like we're often told to just snap out of it or look on the bright side.
Right, and the book pushes back against that toxic positivity. Sadness is a natural part of the human experience. It's a healthy response to loss, disappointment, or even just the complexity of life. It's when we get stuck in sadness, when it becomes all-consuming and prevents us from living fully, that it becomes a problem.
So how do we navigate sadness without getting lost in it? Is it okay to just wallow sometimes?
The book suggests a balance. It's important to allow ourselves to feel the sadness fully, without judgment.
Okay.
Acknowledge it, express it maybe through journaling, talking to a trusted friend, or simply allowing yourself to cry, and then gently shift your focus towards something that brings you joy or meaning.
So it's about honoring the emotion but not letting it define us. I like that. Now, what about jealousy? That seems like a more complex emotion. Sometimes it can feel motivating. Other times it's just plain destructive.
That's a great observation, and the book actually reframes jealousy as a potential source of valuable information. It suggests that jealousy often highlights what we truly desire in our own lives.
So instead of seeing it as purely negative, we can use it as a guidepost.
Exactly.
Hmm?
The book shares an example of Susan Cain, the author of Quiet.
Okay.
She realized she was consistently jealous of writers and psychologists,
Mm-hmm.
but not successful lawyers, even though she was a lawyer at the time.
Right.
This jealousy led her to realize that her true passion lay elsewhere, and she eventually changed careers to become a writer.
I love that example. It shows how paying attention to what we envy in others can actually point us in the right direction. But what about when jealousy stems from comparing ourselves to others?
Yeah, the book addresses that directly, highlighting the inherent unfairness of such comparisons.
Yeah.
We often compare our behind-the-scenes struggles to someone else's highlight reel. We don't see the full picture, their insecurities, their challenges.
That's so true. Social media definitely amplifies this tendency to compare ourselves to others. Does the book offer any advice on how to escape that comparison trap?
They suggest shifting our focus from external validation to internal growth. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to someone else's today.
Mm-hmm.
Celebrate your progress, no matter how big or small.
That's such a powerful reminder. Okay, let's talk about a heavier emotion, depression. It feels like a lot of people struggle with this, but there's still so much stigma around it.
Yeah. The book takes a nuanced approach, differentiating between clinical depression, which requires professional help, and those more general feelings of sadness, hopelessness, or lack of motivation that many of us experience from time to time.
Okay, so for those non-clinical feelings of depression, what does the book recommend?
They emphasize the importance of reconnecting with our bodies and escaping the cycle of negative thinking.
Okay.
They talk about the power of exercise, spending time in nature, meditation, and engaging in activities that bring us joy, all things that can help shift our emotional state.
It makes sense that getting out of our heads and into our bodies can be helpful. Does the book mention any other interesting approaches to dealing with those feelings of low mood?
Yes, they actually quote Alfred Adler, who apparently told his patients, "You can be cured in 14 days if you follow this prescription. Try to think every day how you can please someone."
Wow, that's a surprising piece of advice. Is he suggesting that focusing on helping others can actually help lift us out of our own negativity?
That seems to be the idea. It's about shifting our focus outward instead of getting stuck in our own heads.
I love that. It's a reminder that connection and contribution can be powerful antidotes to feeling down. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Anger, sadness, jealousy, even depression. Are you noticing a pattern in how the book approaches working with these emotions?
Definitely. It's not about denying or suppressing these emotions, but about understanding them, acknowledging them, and then taking action to shift our perspective or behavior. It's about becoming the master of our emotions, not the victim of them.
That's such a powerful takeaway, and I love how the book offers so many practical tools and techniques to help us do just that. But we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover in your research.
You're right. We've still got some fascinating territory to explore.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground already, from understanding how emotions actually form to exploring specific emotions like anger, sadness, and jealousy. And it feels like we're starting to build a toolkit for emotional mastery.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there are a few more gems in your research that I think would be valuable to unpack. We've talked about how our thoughts and beliefs influence our emotions, but what about external factors? The book spends some time on the impact of our environment.
Oh, that's interesting. I can definitely see how our surroundings could play a role in our emotional state. Like a cluttered desk stresses me out, but being out in nature makes me feel calm. Is that kind of what the book is getting at?
Exactly. The book argues that even subtle aspects of our environment can have a significant impact on our mood and energy levels. They even suggest a fun experiment.
Okay.
Try changing one small thing in your workspace, like adding a plant or a piece of art, and see if you notice a shift in your emotional state. It's about creating a space that supports your well-being.
I love that. It's a reminder that we have more control over our environment than we might realize. Okay, what else does the book cover that we haven't touched on yet?
Something that I think a lot of people can relate to, caring too much about what other people think. The book calls this being overly self-conscious.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there, that feeling of constantly worrying about how we're being perceived, second-guessing ourselves, trying to please everyone. It's exhausting.
It really is, and the book highlights how this often stems from a deep-seated desire for approval,
Yeah.
a need to fit in, to be liked, to avoid judgment. But the truth is, no matter how hard we try, we can't please everyone.
It's so true. And I remember reading a quote somewhere that said, "What other people think of me is none of my business."
The book actually echoes that sentiment. It encourages a shift in focus, from seeking external validation to cultivating internal acceptance. It's about recognizing that our worthiness doesn't depend on the opinions of others.
That's such a powerful mindset shift. But it's definitely easier said than done. Does the book offer any practical advice on how to stop caring so much about what others think?
Well, they suggest a journaling exercise.
Okay.
Write down all the things you're afraid of being judged on, and then explore why those judgments matter to you. It helps to bring awareness to those underlying fears and insecurities.
That's a great idea. It helps you to get to the root of those worries and challenge their validity. Okay. Shifting gears a bit. What about resentment? I feel like that's an emotion that can really eat away at us if we let it.
It can be incredibly corrosive.
Yeah.
The book defines resentment as that lingering anger and bitterness we feel when someone hasn't met our expectations or treated us the way we believe we deserve to be treated. It's like holding on to a grudge, replaying the hurt over and over in our minds.
Ugh, yes, I've definitely been there. Like a poison we drink, hoping the other person will get sick. But ultimately, we're the ones who suffer the most. Does the book offer any solutions for letting go of resentment?
They suggest a 4-step process. First, reevaluate your interpretation of what happened. Is it possible you're misinterpreting the situation or the other person's intentions?
Mm-hmm.
Second, confront the situation if possible. Have an honest conversation with the person involved, expressing your feelings and needs.
Okay.
Third, forgive. Remember, forgiveness is for you, not for them.
Right.
And finally, forget. Make a conscious choice to release those thoughts and feelings that are keeping you stuck in resentment.
That's a really practical framework for working through resentment. It reminds us that we have the power to choose how we respond to difficult situations, and that holding on to anger ultimately hurts us more than anyone else. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about stress and worry. They seem almost inevitable in today's world.
They do. And the book offers a surprising perspective on stress. It argues that stress doesn't actually exist outside of ourselves.
Wait, what? How is that possible? There are definitely stressful situations.
Of course, there are challenging circumstances. But the book is saying that it's our reaction to those circumstances that creates stress. It's our thoughts, beliefs, and interpretations that generate the feeling of stress in our bodies.
So it's not the external event itself, but our internal response that
Yeah.
causes stress. That's a really empowering perspective because it suggests that we have more control than we realize.
Exactly. The book even suggests an exercise.
Okay.
Write down all the things that cause you stress, and then categorize them based on whether you have control over them, some control, or no control.
Mm-hmm.
This helps you identify what you can actually influence and what you need to accept.
I love that. It helps you to focus your energy on what you can actually change and let go of the things you can't. What about worry? Is that the same as stress?
The book sees worry as a form of stress specifically focused on potential future events. It's that anxious anticipation of something bad happening.
And often those things we worry about never even come to pass.
Exactly. So the book encourages us to challenge our worries, question their validity, focus on what we can control in the present moment. It's about shifting our energy from anxious anticipation to constructive action.
That's such a helpful reminder. Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey through the world of emotions. As we wrap up, what stands out to you as the most valuable takeaway?
For me, it's the overarching message that we are not our emotions. They are temporary visitors, messengers even, but they don't have to define us. We have the power to choose how we respond, how we interpret, and ultimately how we experience the full spectrum of human emotions.
I couldn't agree more. It's been an enlightening exploration, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to apply these insights to their own lives. Remember, emotional mastery is a lifelong practice, but the rewards are well worth the effort.
Absolutely. And there are so many resources available for further exploration. From books like the one we discussed today to online courses and workshops, the key is to keep learning, keep practicing, and keep growing.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into mastering your emotions. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the ideas that matter.
Kindly head down to description and click the link to purchase the book.
Thank you for listening to us. Please kindly like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also, please let us know which book you would like us to summarize.